You guys have got to see the view here. Also, for those who think that this is green screen, it all interacts, and I have waist deep snow because I forgot my snowshoes this morning. So yeah, pretty realistic green screen. Voiceover Travis here to give you context for this video. I've been teaching wilderness survival full-time for the last 17 years, and one of the benefits of doing this job is getting invited to other survival schools. This one is in Norway, near the Hardanger Plateau. Both the students and other instructors of this survival school ask that I keep them out of the video for privacy reasons. The unintended end result is that it's mostly a single-man show at this point. Being an Arctic school, some of the shelter sites were already pre-selected. This shelter site was used last year, but has since had all the boughs removed and has been snowed in. So my first task is to dig down to the ground on the front and back side so I have an area to work. The downside of reusing the shelter site is that all these crossbars and supporting beams had a bunch of ice and snow on them, which dripped on me over the first night. When you build a shelter from scratch, you have the ability to knock off a little bit more of the snow and not have that problem. Now that it's clear, I'm going to take these fresh pine boughs and weave them into the shelter framing, facing down. These will act like shingles and will help shunt any moisture and snow down towards the ground instead of into our shelter. So you have to place them upside down. In order for a bough shelter to work, you need to add a lot of boughs. If you keep up a good pace, you can be in short sleeves, no matter the kitchen, the conditions. It's -5 right now, but I need to be staying comfortably cold, where I'm not bundled up. It's -5 out. But I've got waterproof bibs on, no thermal pants, just cotton jeans. Shh, don't tell anyone. Apparently cotton kills. People have been saying that for years. I love to have a pair of jeans under my waterproof layer. If you keep it dry, it's fine. If cotton gets wet, it can be a killer, I'll be honest. But it's all about knowing what you have and using it properly. All right, so cotton jeans. I do have nice boots on because Norway, come on. When I get cold, I throw my hat on, and when my hands get cold, I throw on a insulated or a non-insulative weatherproof layer. Let my own heat do the trick. The goal here is to not get soaked by your own sweat because you're working hard. You're modifying trees, you're building a shelter, you're taking out a huge area of snow, you're building a fire reflector and gathering bramble and branches and things to get you through the night. You're moving around, and the last thing you want to do is to be covered in so many layers that you sweat into them, and then when you stop moving, you're wet. That's when you get cold, when you are wet and not moving. I have a little bit of sweat. I'm not drenched, but I'm aerating this off just fine, evaporating this off. Might need to take the bibs down to make sure that I'm not like sweating into my pant line in those areas, so I can stay nice and dry. If you're comfortably cold, you're not sweating as much, and you're going to be better off later. So I do have some big thick warmies and Gore-Tex and all the big puffy stuff, but I'm not going to use it until I need it, and I probably will need it after the sun sets. So keeping it until then. All right, gonna finish building this fire reflector and show you what that looks like. Now I'm sharpening sticks, stabbing them into the ground, 4 of them, in order to create the 4 points of the fire reflector. The technique here is sharpen stick, beat on stick, with bigger stick. I try to keep it vertical. Once you have 4 of those, like that, then you stack some big logs there. We're gonna roll the fire away a little bit so we have a fire reflector back into our shelter. Before I finished that fire reflector, I went ahead and prepped up a fire for that night. I'll talk more about the tools that I'm using to do this here in a little bit, but the basics are the same as my fire making video that I made a few months ago. If you haven't seen that, that's fine. All you need to know is that the ignition source is not the most important part of your fire. I don't care if you use a Bic, ferrocerium rod, or bow drill to get this going. As long as you have the right preparation, you will have a successful fire. Personally, I prefer the ferrocerium rod, sometimes called the ferro rod, metal match, or flint and steel, even though it's not technically flint nor steel. Lighters tend to fail when they're wet and when they're super cold. And seeing as wet and cold conditions are the times that you most want to fire, I prefer a metal match, which thrives in those conditions. Now, this isn't my first time in Norway. I helped out with another survival course a few years ago. But even though I knew what to expect, I was still astounded by the stark beauty of this natural country. Originally, I'm from the US, Michigan specifically, but I'm currently living in Germany, and I help out with these survival courses around the world. Out of all the courses I've taught and all the biomes that I've survived in, this is one of my favorites. If you want a similar experience in North America, check out the Snow Train in Sioux, Canada. Oh, we're good. Got flame. We don't want to smother it, but we're going to add a whole bunch of birch bark. Now, if I put wood on this, it'll smother it, so I need to have a big brace here to keep that off of the birch bark a little bit. Leave some air gaps. Notice how I have all of my prep over here stored with the bark down, split side up. Add an equalizing brace over here. Across. You want to get your big stuff on there as soon as possible. Split side down. Bark down has a lot of moisture. It's the middle of the winter here. Split side down. Let room for smoke and flames to come up through. Do it again. Split side down. Cool. Once you have a couple layers of that, you can start using full rounds, but they need to be melted and dried off. So we're going to put 2 of those on top. And we're going to let this sit for a bit. While it's going, let me go ahead, get this super icy one, the bottom of this tree, directly on top. Yeah, covered in snow. It's best to bang this off as best you can, but in the end of the day, you're not gonna find clean dry wood everywhere. So you've got to build a fire that's capable of drying off your wood. Nice. Immediately put away your gear. Anything near the fire needs to go away. Now, get you out of the smoke there. Oh, put you up here. I'll show you some of the tools that I'm using today. You've seen me make this. This is just a bearded hatchet. I put a small hand axe and handle on it in a previous video. I explained all the details on that, so I'm not gonna go over it. I'm using my little modified hatchet. My knife, I'm using a SE5 knife. They're big, they're burly, and they're a bit too much, but man, they never break. And sometimes overkill is underrated when it comes to your gear in situations where you need it. Third thing, which I love, is this big boy silky saw. It's huge. You've got to flip it out, locks into place. This thing's like a sword. The larger size of this silky is called a katana, and none of these are sponsored or affiliated. It's just a gear I picked. So this is the big boy. The katana is like another 6 inches longer. Absolutely ridiculous saw. But the way these saws work is you need to clear the teeth of the item that you're cutting. So if you're cutting something like as thick as my arm, you need to have a saw twice that thickness so the teeth can completely clear your cutting material and drop the wood chips. Because if you sit there and just make small strokes with this, or you have a small saw, it's not going to get the penetration or the ripping that is required. So love this micarta handle. I think that's what you call it. Super great. Flies through this wood like a chainsaw. You see these look almost like they're cut with a chainsaw, if you saw earlier, or if the resolution is good enough. They're flat and round, and so are those larger 8-inch birch logs from earlier. But that's all this saw. I've not used a chainsaw out here. I don't have a chainsaw out here. There's one up at another camp I might use later in this trip, depending on how lazy I get. But for now, big boy silky saw. That's still going, that's still drying out, still smoking. I can hear it crackling, that's good. So we're gonna let that go while I show you the rest of the shelter. All right, I store my gear. It's either stood up directly in the snow within reaching distance of my shelter, or on my pack, on my bed, like everything here. This is a bough bed. I used all the off branches of this bough shelter to create that insulating layer. And then one pace out is a fire, another pace out there will be a fire reflector once we get to that point. On the back side here, it's a lean-to. It's already been snowing on it. Look closely. Oh, is it gonna focus? Okay, there we go. You got snow already accumulating because it's freaking Norway, guys. It's snowy here in January 11th, 2023. Absolutely beautiful. I got some drone shots for you earlier. I always dig out a trench behind my shelter so that I can step down into it, not need snowshoes, not be post holing, and have this work area to layer the boughs up and down. And try to pick shelter sites that are already covered with as many boughs and branches as possible. Some of the snow will leak down on the shelter once the fire gets going. All right, so you're starting to see where we're starting to smoke out. This extra smoke is white, so it tells me it's moisture. Those gray spots in there, those darker areas, is fuel. So once we get hot enough, we'll burn off that moisture. This fire will start igniting all this fuel, and we'll have a nice hot fire as those flames lick through the top. Shortly after I got it going really well, I found out that you can use the drone rotor wash to really get this sucker going. Now I've got extremely limited battery use, especially in the cold environment I'm in, so I only use this for a couple of seconds because it was fun. Arguably, it's a better way of fanning the flames than using your own breath, because when you blow on a fire, you're also dumping the moisture out of your lungs onto the embers. It's typically not recommended to blow on a fire that you're trying to get started, but we all do. All right, so the fire's going. I keep adding wet wood so it's not roaring, but it is going, and I can dry off more and more. I've got the tea kettle heating up some snow, make some drinking water. Since it's precipitation and unspoiled, we should be good to go. Here's the tops of the fire reflector, lashed together, 4 logs high. Now the fire's a little too close. It should be halfway between the bough bed and the fire reflector, or 2/3 from the bough bed to the fire reflector. So I got to move it another foot or two this way. I'm gonna wait till there's some better coals so I can scrape it out and not completely destroy it. So that's where I am on day 1. I am excited and happy, so I want to keep going. But I know that if I wear myself out today, I'm gonna have a really hard time getting a lot done tomorrow. So this is where we're gonna leave it. I'm gonna pull up my sleeping roll and pad, and the sun's setting. I'm going to enjoy a good book, watch the fire, and get some rest. Before you click away, check out these shots that I got once the sun actually came out on day 2 or 3. Northern winters can seem pretty grayscale until you have that sunlight hit in just the right way. If you want to help out the channel, like, comment, and subscribe, of course. But if you wanted to help even more, there's a link to our Patreon in the description below. Thank you for watching.